Hello all, I'm Christos Christiadis, and this is Aqua Agitators, where the real water experts take the stand. Today we have another episode of the Brine Trust, an initiative with people from the brine space of the water industry. And today I would like to welcome Pia Boyer and Chris Fellows. Pia, Chris, would you like to run a quick intro of yourselves? I know you are returning speakers to the program, but perhaps some people don't know yet. Pia, would you like to go first?
Sure. Okay. So my name is Pia. Thank you again, Christos, for bringing us all together around this topic, this vital topic of brine. My name is Pia Boyer, and I work with a company, a French consultancy called Euphrates Energies. And I have the immense privilege of working with research institutions in Arabia, KAUST, the King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, and Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi, with researchers in diverse topics from membranes to desalination, economics of desalination, to graphene, 2D materials, and membranes, getting down to what we can do to better valorize this topic of brine. So that's our focus. I bring together the research institutions and the industrial partners, and I'm delighted to be here with you and working on this topic and moving the question forward.
Thank you. Chris?
And I'm Chris Fellows. Thank you very much for inviting me back, Christos. It's good to be back here
My
again.
pleasure.
I'm basically a physical chemist out of academia. I still have an adjunct appointment as a professor at the University of New England in Australia. But 5 years ago, I came out to this subcontinent of Arabia to work at the research center of the Saline Water Conversion Corporation, so more recently transformed into the Saudi Water Authority. And I guess the main driving force in doing this was to take some ideas that I'd only seen on the lab scale and see them make a difference in the real world. So what I try to do is bring the habits of thought of physical chemistry, which are very quantitative, and you always have this strong separation in your mind between your thermodynamically and kinetically controlled processes, for example. So try to bring those thoughts to the full desalination space, but brine valorization in particular.
Thank you very much. So, as you already know, we had already an episode of the Brine Trust. Unfortunately, you weren't able to make it for this discussion, and this is why you're running this kind of a commentary episode. And one topic that came very early to the discussion was about the environmental impact of brine, which I think, Chris, you might have some comments on that.
Yes, I would just like to push back a little bit against the idea that was expressed that desalination might be contributing to a overall degradation of the Arabian Gulf. So here, I think if we look at the flows quantitatively, the main driver is evaporation, which is simply huge compared to everything else that is going on. And then you have to balance that the inflow of the less dense, less saline seawater and the outflow of more dense saline seawater down the bottom. So that the magnitudes of those fluxes are really large. And then the next two fluxes coming down after that are actually precipitation. So even though it doesn't rain that much in the Gulf region, when you spread out over that land area, it's a lot of water. And anecdotally, at least, it seems over recent decades that precipitation has been increasing, which is what we would expect from climate change, going back looking at all the prehistoric records. We get a slightly greener Arabia. And then so that's probably a net positive. And then we have a net negative, getting to this Euphrates name that you mentioned, from the fact that all those rivers that used to feed into the northern end of the Gulf have been diverted and used for other purposes. So desalination is really the last of those. So in terms of an overall impact, it's going to be lost in the noise for the foreseeable future. Where we can have an impact and where there is some good evidence is places like in between Bahrain and Al Khobar, for example,
Mhm.
and a few other locations along the coast where we do have good evidence that we do have local salinity increases. So these are very shallow waters, and the salinity there naturally is much higher than what you've got out in the middle of the Gulf. And I believe strongly that that's impacted primarily by all the land reclamation that's been going on around there. So the natural currents that would disrupt any waters of increased salinity going in have really been confused a big deal by enormous land reclamation in these areas. And I'm sure people did the best they could when they did this, but I think the highest priority of the people who are reclaiming this land wasn't to allow the water to continue to flow freely and disperse out of the more restricted areas. So that's just my little pushback I wanted to get on the record there about the potential environmental impact of desalination, Brine.
And we've talked about this before. So I did also want to add in here that I think I agree 300% with the idea that we have this influx problem with the reduction of the Euphrates and the Tigris and the basins at the base of these rivers. These are like human problems that because of, as you mentioned, the fact that we have the diversion of the currents, the natural currents, because we have this buildup along the coast. We have this kind of, we say in French, the bétonisation, where the concrete buildup along the coast, the natural, I think, human tendency to develop coastal properties. You want to be close to the ocean, and it's been a traditional historical rite of passage almost in the Gulf area to have the movement from the deserts out to the oceans. And so I think that for me, when we talk about desalination, it is, you can't take it out, you can't remove it and say it's just one part of the problem, because we have desalination is a need for water. So we have this need for drinking water that's going to accompany greater and greater population along that coastal area. And that's, it's a comprehensive problem that comes into this, bringing the concrete, the development, and the diversion of the currents. So our issue of brine is we can't take it out and say that we can identify that we have 10% or 3 grams per liter more of salinity. I think we really have to look at a problem as a comprehensive issue, and so for me, I think when I was reading through the notes from the past session, I think that it's a problem that it is a part of a whole. So it's I maybe I come down more on the fact that it is an environmental impact to the Gulf ecosystem on both sides, because we have the Bandar Abbas sites. They're going to be coming up, increasing production, like I think 1 million cubic liters at the end of the 5 stages, and then also the increased production, Hassian coming in, with Tawila. We have plants all up and down both sides of the Gulf in what's essentially a very small area. So
yeah, and Riyadh's not getting any smaller, and we are trying to shift away from the groundwater that's being used there. So the demand is just going to increase. I guess what I'm saying more than anything else is to think about these issues quantitatively and spend our money in the best way. I mean, and put our effort into what's going to give us the best impact. So if by relatively low cost changes in like urban planning and in outfall design, we can get the same net impact as we could by a multi-billion dollar process to implement zero liquid discharge. And we should go for the path of least resistance, the lowest energy pathway.
Completely. And I mean, this is, I think, what the work that with the crystals that you're doing, like bringing these people together to talk about this, the more light that we can shed on the questions of brine and water. I think this is, it's geopolitical. You can't ever isolate any water issue, because it's groundwater, it's drinking water, it's the water that we have in the ocean. So we need to work on all levels, from the governments to industry to research institutions and the general public, to find the best solutions together to, as you say, adjust the levers like where we need to put the weight. So
From my side, I would like to separate the direct and indirect impact of brine discharge, and we have to consider the indirects as the lost opportunity, and the lost opportunity to gain more water, the lost opportunity to regain critical salts and minerals. So from one side, we could help our water resources. From the other side, we could reduce carbon footprints by potentially producing these products in our backyard instead of shipping them from far, far away. So we need to, for certain, we need to think holistically in order to solve this problem. And but in order to understand a little bit of brine treatment and brine valorization, where do you think lies the future with this specific process? And an outcome of last conversation was that partial, perhaps, brine valorization can be the immediate future for this technology space. Anybody have some thoughts on
Do
that?
you want to go first, Pia?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I agree with that. I don't have any. I don't have to any from it's my conviction from the discussions that I've had with the people in the research side and also in industry that we need to, as Chris has said, find the ways to make small adjustments. We're not working with the groups that I'm working with. We're not working on a ZLD or zero liquid discharge. I think it's a great goal. It sounds great, but I think ultimately the cost benefit analysis is not going to work out for either the cost of water or the cost of producing water or the ultimately for the people who are needing to drink the water. So yeah, I think that we need to be looking at small adjustments. Looking at processes, trying to simplify the processes. And one of the points they mentioned in the last discussion that I really agree with is local solutions that are adapted to specific needs. Where you might have, they mentioned the plant in Indonesia where there's a need for the salts that are for using it, I think in ramen, which is very high consumption of ramen. I've been working with Chris on like sources for salt that we can solve the problem of sodium chloride. But so we're still working on it. But I think that it's going to be a local solution that's going to be adapted to each specific context. Is my personal conviction after the research that I've done into the topic.
Yeah. I was going to say something very similar. The future will look very different in different places. So I was also struck by what I think Bassel Abusharf said in the earlier episode about the unique situation in Indonesia that makes solar salt production not feasible there. So the membranes suddenly become much more economically viable. So I mean, there's places around the world where solar salt production is taking place on a huge scale and cheaply enough that they can afford to export it to the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So I think in Baja California and in Western Australia, there are these huge solar salt projects. Those are both places that are quite close to large centers that have a great need for water. So if those were run from desalination plant output rather than just taking seawater indirectly, there'd be a big improvement in productivity. Conceivably. Another thing that came out is the fact that when you do the analysis, magnesium sort of sticks out as having an enormous amount of value. And if it was easy, we would be doing it already, I believe. So there are some technical barriers in the way to producing magnesium metal or magnesium salts economically from desalination brine. So I don't know which pathway is going to overcome that barrier. I'm confident that we will overcome it. We're looking at different ways to get over or around it. And that will really, which path we go down will kind of determine what the magnesium space will look like for seawater desalination brine mining in the future.
Mm-hmm. But by the way, Chris, here's a question from my side. Why don't we see more discussions in the kingdom for the use of evaporation ponds for
I
brine
think
valorization.
hmm, I think it's probably related to this topic that Pia mentioned, that everyone wants to live by the seaside, and they're very nice places. People want to occupy all these territories with a million and one different activities. So I mean, there are solar salt projects on both sides um, of the kingdom, but they don't tend to be located. Well, at the Chuaiba, there is a significant one that's pretty much right next to a desalination plant. But by and large, the desalination plants and the solar salt facilities are remote from each other. There were other solar salt production facilities on the other side of Jeddah that were resumed for other development, so pushed further away. So I think it pretty much comes down to there's lots of uses for that land.
Yeah, but in the end, evaporation ponds do not make do make sense in so few places around the world where there are the right climate conditions and ample space to do it. And KSA has both, especially for larger projects. I think that makes a more suitable solution. But yeah, I've always been curious as to why we don't discuss this solution in this, let's say, local area.
Yeah,
Um,
well, we should definitely discuss it more. I mean, I've been present at places where it's discussed, and I've spoken to people who believe that we will have to go that way if we want to get anything that looks like at Neom, for example, for a 100% extraction solution. That's going to be the only way to do it eventually.
yeah, yeah. So, do you think what is the contaminant in the brines that you think will drive the process? Uh, People tend to think now that magnesium will be the product that can make the change and finally push for the project implementation of brine valorization. What's your opinion?
I think magnesium is the main, is where most of the value sits. That's not sodium chloride. If we come up tomorrow with some impressive new use that suddenly needs an extra 100 million tons of sodium chloride, then maybe.
Still, the only brine valorization project I know is the one in Indonesia, and it's not about magnesium. It's about sodium chloride.
Right. I guess it depends. Yeah, it depends what you define as a project. I guess it's and what you define as brine valorization. Um,
Well, it's partial brine valorization, right?
yeah.
And for me, even if we just take water out of the brine, it's still you still valorize it in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's Cyprus too with TU Delft, and I know that in Spain too, the Guillermo Zaragoza's work, I think, with in the Canary Islands.
But
There's other
are this pilot? Is this piloting or is this an actual
Cyprus.
project?
I think that they're at the scale now of 1,000 cubic meters per day
Okay,
trade in. So
so yeah, and why I'm asking this is that we are at a point in the water industry history that we have the way to produce more the most cheaply capex and opex wise concentration up to 210 to 30 to 50 grams per liter if possible with membranes, and yet we're still trying to find a feasible way to do brine valorization. Why is that? Why are we still striving to convince people to do project implementation?
Do you want
Well,
to go?
part of it also came up in the last episode, which is that 250,000 parts per million is a long way from 1 million parts per million, which is where we have to get if we want to have a saleable product. So if you have an end user who's happy with a brine that's not 100% sodium chloride, if that will work happily in their process, then that's great. But all of our end users basically want something that's purer than that. So I guess the two ways forward are if there's a membrane-based process, say, to separate out the sodium and potassium that's efficient enough, then that's one way of kind of getting rid of that big crystallizer barrier at the end. If you can make a sodium solution that's pure enough for your end users. Or alternatively, some other way to, besides thermal crystallization. So we were talking before about eutectic freeze crystallization before you turned the recording on.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there still might be some scope there for reducing that barrier that we have with thermal crystallization. And the other way, of course, that you can bring about crystallization is changing the nature of the solvent. And so there have been a few different organic compounds that have been trialed to make salts crash out. So you can simulate that same process of things crashing out sequentially that would happen in a solar evaporation ponds with the different minerals in sequence, but doing that by changing the nature of the solvent. And that's all about the energy cost of getting that organic out of your continuous phase again once the solids have come out. But there are many potential organic compounds out there, and quite a lot of interesting work that's being done in that area, still sort of on the bench scale. But I think that's another potential way to get rid of this big barrier of the crystallization at the end.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I think that, as you said before, right, the science that we're going to be seeing coming to the fore in the next 5 years is going to be very different than what we're working with today. And so even when we're designing projects now, we design a 4-year project saying that we're starting with core technologies that we know that are dependable. We're high TRL, a technology readiness level, where we're looking at 7 to 8 in TRL. But some of the things that are coming with crystallization might be at 3 to 4 at this point, if we're talking about deep eutectic solvents. And it's this idea of translational research where we're bringing in this technology from other different other domains to bring it to apply it to the topic of how do we get rid of this? How do we isolate? How do we bring it down, break down, not to ZLD, but just getting things down to a manageable purity where we can have a TRL that's going to be commercially acceptable and viable. Because it has to be, you have to have it, if you're going to be working in any type of industry, you need to be having it be financially feasible. And so one of the things that we're looking at with the processes that we're developing are the idea of cogeneration, where we're using energy and waste heat through every part of the process to kind of bring everything and make the whole a cohesive whole that is going to be not self-sustaining, but as sustainable as possible in terms of using of energy. So that's going back to this idea of local, adaptable solutions.
Now, as far as I'm concerned, the separate projects have a lot of issues in order to get to the point of ZLD, never mind brine valorization. And this is because you have to check a lot of parameters. But what if we, again, I hate to repeat the same message again and again, what if we think a bit outside of the box and we try to apply economy of scale by solidifying the brines as mixed salts and creating central separation hubs that by the size of the feed you can provide sizable enough products to excuse all the capex and opex effort that you put into creating the recovery process. And by this way, you can not only recover the basic salts, but then go after the critical minerals that are in minuscule concentrations in most brines.
I think this doesn't really make sense in the seawater space, Christos, but where it may well make sense is in the space of inland desalination, where you have maybe relatively small amounts of brines being generated at multiple locations, and where there's no environmentally responsible way to dispose of them on site. So bringing all those brines together to a central facility for processing does make sense. And clearly doing that, you wouldn't want to be shipping a lot of water across the landscape. So getting it to as concentrated a form as possible, even a solid, before you do that does make sense. With the volumes that we generate anyways in seawater, though, I think that there's not that much benefit to be gained except at the final stage. So if we had systems set up everywhere, so we were extracting all the sodium chloride, and we had the divalent ions split off somewhere else, so we had this stream coming out of multiple desalination plants that was the purge left over after the sodium chloride is gone. So a very small volume of the brine that originally started out. There it might potentially make sense to bring those together to a central location, and you could imagine applying some sort of a passive absorption system to the pools where you had this brine stored, so that the lithium, in the best case, is slowly agglomerating onto this adsorption material over a long period of time. They can take it out and process it, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree, but just from the infrastructure perspective, having a central concentration hub would be, I mean, it's a great, like on paper, I think it works, but when we actually look at land use and the cost of transmission lines to be getting the brines from the coast into some kind of centralized facility would be detrimental for that.
I remember a couple of years ago, we had a sort of brainstorming session with the students at KAUST, actually, and we sort of put this, how to valorize brine to them. And one idea they came up with was to create a Saudi Dead Sea. So we pump all the brine to an appropriate location inland, and make you have a tourist attraction at one end, and then you would have your industries working to process the solar concentrated brine at the other end. And I don't know, I think that maybe that is technically possible.
Well, if you go back into history, that's pretty much what it was in Saudi Arabia. It was an ocean before. so yeah, you're just closing the loop in terms of history. So
given all these problems that we face with the project implementation side due to all these parameters that need to be checked, do you think that we need to put more efforts with startups into targeted extraction of ions from brines? Is this the way to go for the technology development in brine valorization?
I think if you talk about brines, maybe so. I mean, we talked before about how getting a whole commercial project, it has to be integrated and have all these different processes for different products, all tied together. So a targeted product does certainly get around that, and it's something that small and medium enterprise might be more have a greater capacity to take on. The question just comes to me is what is a viable target? Maybe something we don't think about very much is bromine. So bromine, probably said this before in your hearing, is very much the low hanging fruit. There are good established technologies for getting it out of seawater, and so that's targeted extraction of one product that we know is commercially viable, and there's not really that much to be gained perhaps by complicated pre-treatment of brine before you do whatever, to say, chemical reaction. If you're just doing a chemical precipitation to get out a magnesium hydroxide, say, there's no real need to do a complicated process before that. So you can think of that as a targeted extraction as well, if you're just going directly for magnesium hydroxide. But again, that's pretty old technology. We know that nature can do amazing things, so it can separate potassium and sodium, like that with cellular membranes. If you've got a good sort of biomimetic system for taking potassium out selectively, that might be exciting. And there's been occasional talk about potential big new markets for rubidium, and if you look at the concentrations that are there, it might be another good target. Do you have any other targets you thought of, Christos or Pia, that have crossed your radars? Something for selective extraction?
Yeah, I'll let you go first.
One of we like of course we all know the graphs, the tables of the availability in seawater and then the facility of extraction. So, and magnesium is of course going to be the first one. Some of the other of the processes, some of the other uses for the DES, for the eutectic solvents, would be boron. We're looking. I think what we need to move ahead in. I've come down on the side. I think I wouldn't say we need to target one specific technology or one specific element. We need to multiply research and find from the different domains where I think what we found in just even working in the question of the process we're working with industrial providers is that even when you're looking at things like electrolyzers, where we have technology that is it's older than the combustion engine, yet we don't have the we can do things with cars that we cannot do with electrolyzers today. So I think that we need to, across the board, really I stimulate, accelerate research to optimize the entire process, looking as a comprehensive problem to the treatment of brine. So yeah, I would say magnesium is going to be definitely on the low-hanging fruit. Instead of dealing with off-takers who are going to ship it around the world, why don't we look at also stimulating the local economy to find the uses? Like in Emirates, they have Fertiglobe. We have some geopolitical issues where maybe we have less fertilizers coming in from Russia into the European market. What about local production in Arabia to make a shorter circuit between the end users for these fertilizers than the actual? Christos, your turn.
On the note on that, I thought I would be too pedantic mentioning the fertilizer option, but here's the deal: at least from seawater brines, you can produce magnesium sulfate and potassium sulfate, and you have the option of combining potassium sulfate with ammonia to get potassium nitrate, which is the most expensive fertilizer right now in the market. So if you combine hydrogen projects which use desalination and produce ammonia, then you have the option with very high volumes to produce a very lucrative fertilizer. And this is something that I would like perhaps to see explored more in the future when it comes to these projects. Chris, if you have any disagreements, I'm happy to hear it.
I think looking at magnesium sulfate as a product for fertilizer, and salt, potassium chloride, or potassium sulfate, those are definitely very good directions to go. I mean, we don't have, to my knowledge, anywhere in the GCC local sources of these fertilizers. And that reminded me of another example, brine valorization project. So we are extracting, or have been extracting, magnesium sulfate rich solution from our brine at Shoaiba, the Saudi Water Authority system, for the purposes of fortifying water to bring up the magnesium content. So I would say that's a valid brine valorization project, and part of that further along the road is to use that water also in demonstration fertigation applications.
So
Just want to wait.
apparently we don't have a lot of time for this meeting. We have to end it in around 5 minutes. But before we do that, another topic that was discussed last time was about venture capital in the brine space. How can we make it more appealing to environmental fans to enter our little beloved niche corner of in the science world? Do we need more communication outside our bubble? Do we need to present it in another way other than a black box? What are your thoughts on that?
I guess I'm an academic, so it's an alien world to me. What I've seen out there is that the people who do seem to attract venture capital are very good at making very flash websites, and you know, the amount of valid science and technology in their project is you know, unrelated to their success. So maybe there's a role for marketing.
Here's the deal. Sorry, Pia, just a note on this. So, do we need, as experts, to self-regulate our space in order for investment money not to go to wrong places?
Yeah, I think we have a duty not to say crazy things, not to raise hopes super high.
Yeah, not to be the snake oil salespeople.
Yeah. So, yeah. On the other hand, I did want to say when you were following on from something you said before, Pia, about letting 1,000 flowers bloom, sort of thing. I think there's scope for like giving academics money to pursue crazy ideas. We don't know what's going to happen down the road, but yeah, we don't want to give that same amount of money to snake oil salesmen.
No. No, I think that venture capital, from what I've heard in the EU, in terms of investments in venture capital, energy is still, of course, the first position, but water is moving up and has replaced agriculture in terms of investment. So I think that just for unfortunate natural reasons, that water is going to become more and more a topic that is going to be, you can't turn away from it, because we're having more and more issues of water scarcity with the groundwater issue. With pollution, with the PFAS, people are really starting to turn attention back to the issue of water and realizing that it really is the source of life, and we don't have 50 years to figure this problem out. So I believe that naturally there is going to become more of a focus, and we need to make it kind of remove it from the realm of like a environmental problem and say that it actually is it's a life problem. We all have this problem. It confronts everyone. It's from all walks of life. We all need water to drink, and we need to be conscious of how it's produced and the impact that it has of the production. So I think that maybe I'm an optimist, but I do believe that even in terms of pragmatism and reality, that the money will follow. If we do, as you say, we need not like I know, Christos, you've talked about this before. I don't know how much you want to talk about what you've been thinking on the idea of creating kind of more standards even in the fields that we're working with today in brine valorization, so that we can have a startup who would just say, oh yeah, we're going to give you like an ROI of like 300 million, whatever. But so it's Christos. Do you want to talk about what you've been thinking in that area?
Well, I would love to have 300 million to spend.
Don't sign up for it, Christos. Don't give them your money.
Okay, that was the teaser for next time, I guess. So.
And with that, I would like to thank you both very much for taking time out of your agenda to meet me online today and to share your thoughts and insights on the brine topics. Hopefully, we can have a bigger, let's say, conversation with the rest of the Brine Trust members someday soon. Take care. We will stay in touch, and hopefully, we will come up with more ideas to share.
Great. Always a pleasure. Okay.
Great to see you.